All right, so just a couple quick announcements. The Polytechnic campus administrators are going to do a Tuesday evening Q&A with students from 8 p.m. to 8:30. So any questions you have related to COVID or any of that stuff, the dean and associate dean and some other administrators are going to be available for you guys. And then also there's COVID chats that they're releasing to just provide more information on COVID. So those should pop up in your Canvas on announcements. So just wanted to bring that to your guys' attention. All right, let's click on this course. There are a few of you that still were working on getting chapter 1 quiz done, so I reopened that. So it's open until this next Sunday, so about a week. So you can get that done this week. And then a few of you weren't able to get chapter 2 quiz done, so I opened that up until this Sunday as well. So go ahead and get that done. Also, if you're still working on the case study for chapter 2 and class activity from this last week, please get those done this week and turned in. All right, so I don't want you to get behind on those. And then what I'm doing, so here in Canvas, each week I'm uploading the lectures and the coding tutorials that we're doing. Okay, so they should all be like on one page like this. So I'll have Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. Zoom recordings there, so you have all those in one spot. So that's how I'm going to try to do that for each week for the rest of the semester. Okay, so this week we are going to cover chapter 3 in the book, which covers kind of getting started with CSS, cascading style sheets, talking about some color and fonts with HTML. And so it's kind of broken up into 3 sections here, right? And then there's 3 different quizzes that are broken up based on those 3 topics from the book, okay? And then of course we'll have your hands-on practice activities and then the case study for this week. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and load up the slides. So we're gonna walk through all of the important information for this chapter. Okay. Move stuff around on my screen so I can see the page here. Okay, all right. Okay, so chapter 3. Oops. There we go. So we're going to talk about style sheets and what those are and how to use those. We're going to talk about color, using color on the web page, different types of style sheets. Okay, so there's some different ones. And then we're going to break down the different parts of a style sheet. All right. Okay, so when I upload these slides at the end of the class today, there'll be a link here. You can go to CSS Zen Garden. And that's a pretty cool site because it just has a lot of different examples of what you can do with CSS. So it's pretty amazing the different things that you can accomplish with using cascading style sheets on your website. So website or CSS is actually kind of an older concept. Even before websites, it was used in desktop publishing. So like when a designer was working on like a book or a magazine or something, they would use these different styles for the different text within the document, and they could apply those styles to multiple pieces of text throughout the magazine or the book. And so then the nice thing was if you needed to change the color, maybe you needed to change the font or the font size, you could just change that one time in the style sheet, and then it would be applied to all the different pieces of text within the document. And that's exactly how the CSS works for web. We have one style sheet, and then we can apply that style to multiple paragraphs, multiple headers, that are on multiple pages throughout a site. And that way you only have to change that one time, and you don't have to go in and change it for every single element on every single page within the site. Because some sites, we're talking hundreds of documents, hundreds of HTML files. And if we're using just one style sheet to control all that styling, it makes it a lot more functional to make changes, okay? So with CSS, we get greater typography and page layout control. Like I said, the style is separate from the structure. Our style sheets can be stored in separate documents. And then it's, like I said, it's easier to maintain a site using CSS. All right, so there's a few different types of style sheets. There's inline styles, embedded styles, external styles, documents, and imported styles. And we'll go over all these in detail here in just a bit. So inline styles, those would be something that you incorporate right into the body section of your HTML. It's an HTML style attribute. The only problem is you can only apply that to one specific element. If we're using embedded styles, which we'll do quite a bit with our coding practice activities, for this, you embed the style sheet in the head section of our HTML file, okay? So remember that top part of our page, we would put the style sheet there. And then those styles then would be applied to that entire document. All right, so the one with the biggest functionality here is external style sheets. That's a separate text file with a .css file extension. And then what we do is we link that style sheet in our head section of the page, and then we can do that. We just have to link that one time, like I said, in multiple HTML documents. So if you have a site with 20 or 30 pages, we just put that link to the style sheet in the head section of each of those pages one time. And then from there, then to make changes to the styling of our website, we just have to change that one CSS file. And imported styles, pretty much the same as external style sheets. This would be something, so later in the semester, we'll talk about a service called Bootstrap. It's basically where we're linking to some external styles on a third-party web server. Okay, so that would be when we're importing a style sheet into our pages. All right, so the CSS syntax, so kind of how this, a rule, this is what we call they're comprised of rules within the CSS. Each of those rules contains a selector, which would be that first part there, so the body. So there we're telling it what we're styling, okay, what are we applying these different design changes to. So for this example, it would be the body section of our HTML document. And then we have our declarations, right? So within the declarations, there's a couple different pieces there. There's the property. So that would be like color, font, things like that. And then we have the value, the declaration value, and that's just telling it, if for color, what color are we going to use? If it's a font, what font are we going to use? Okay, so that would be the value. All right, so there's just a simple example here. If we wanted to configure a web page to display blue text on a yellow background, we would use this styling. We would type body, space, and then we'd have our curly bracket, and then we do color, colon, blue, or we could use a hexadecimal color. We'll talk about those here in a second. After each rule there, we add a semicolon, and then our next, or each declaration, we add a semicolon, and then so the next part is background hyphen color. Okay, so we want our background color to be yellow. Okay, so background hyphen color colon yellow. And then we close that with the closing curly bracket. And then the bottom one there is just using, like I said, the hexadecimal color values. And we'll talk about those in more detail here in a bit. All right, so in table 3.1 in the book, we have some common CSS properties. All right, so the different things that we can change here using CSS, for example, background color. When you see color, that's always going to be applied to the text. Okay, so we don't have to type out text color, we just type color. Font family, font size, font weight, line height. Okay, so this is the spacing between your different lines of text. Margins, the alignment, so we can like left align, justify, center text. Text decoration, we can add some special styling to it there. Width, okay, so this is like if we're setting up different divs within our layout, can set certain widths for that. All right, and so this table here, like I said, this should be in your book as well. Just kind of talks about some of these different CSS properties, and then the description, the values. All right, so like, for example, font size, we can change that using pixel units, so PX. We can actually type in text values like extra small or small. Another unit would be M, so EM, right? So the EM, that unit corresponds to the width of an uppercase M within that current font family, right? So there's a few different ways that we could size our fonts on a page. Font weight, right? So we're talking about bold, light, right? So we can type those text values, or we can use numeric values for that as well. Letter spacing, again, same thing. We can use pixels or M units. Line height, we can use percentages, different values there. And it's the same thing for margins. We can use, normally we'll use pixels for margins. All right, text align, again, you can see there, center, justify, left or right. Text decoration, this is one that you'll probably use a lot with hyperlinks within your page. A lot of times you don't want that underline decoration on the text link. And so we can apply a value of none to that text decoration to get rid of that. Oops. Just a couple other ones here with word spacing. There's all types of different values that we can use there as well. So take a look at those in your book, or you can look at the slides when I get those uploaded. All right, so let's jump to color here. We'll come back to CSS here in a bit, but want to talk about some different color definitions here for using the web. Everything uses RGB color values within web pages because we're using digital here. Okay, so the way to kind of think about these hexadecimal numbers is the first two set of characters, right? So, for example, let's use black. So black is kind of the absence of any color. So the first two is 0, 0. So that just means that we have no red value. The second set of numerals there would be for the green, and then the last two would be for the blue, okay? And so you can kind of see there as well in the first three examples in that column of color. The red, we're using FF. That just means we're using that kind of the full value of red. Same thing for green and blue. All right. So that's kind of the way that the hexadecimal value is kind of broken down. And we'll have I'll have later, I think next week or the week after, we'll get into a little bit more detail on color, but this will just kind of get you started for now. Because there's some pretty cool tools that you can use for coming up with color schemes and different things like that. All right, so again, there's a lot of different color combinations that you can use with the hexadecimal system. Okay. So we talk about a web-safe color palette. It's kind of a collection of 216 colors. With most of the displays, as far as like phone screens and your laptops and tablets and things like that, the amount that we can do with color is a lot better than it used to be, say even 5-10 years ago. So there's a lot more options that we can have in our toolkit as far as color. So that link there, that's a color chart the textbook author provides. And like I said, I'll share some other ones with you. Again, here's some more options for creating color schemes. The one I use a lot is this Adobe color wheel. It's really nice. So if you remember that first week, we talked about accessibility, right? So we want to make sure that our color choices that we use for our text and background work well enough that there's enough contrast that you can read the text, okay? So there's some tools out there that we can use to check the contrast to see if it passes, to be an approved website. Because we have to think about, sometimes there's people who their vision might be a little poor. So we want to make sure that our pages are accessible. So let me just click on one of these, see if we can. All right, so this is the site that I'll use a lot. It's just webaim.org, resources, contrast checker. And what you can do here, you can enter different values for like a foreground and background color. Okay, so like your text and your background. All right, so let's choose some options here. Let's do like a yellow. Let's do like a kind of a light yellow color for our text. And then you can see there, if I left the background white, over here, what it does is it tells me that it fails all of these contrast checks. Okay, so I got all red fails there. And you can see that it's really hard to read the text there when we're using a yellow with a white background. Okay, so if I did want to use yellow text in my design, probably what I'm going to do is go to like a darker background. Okay, so you can kind of see as I make the dark ground back, if I make the background dark here, kind of hit that threshold right around in here, we get enough contrast that it's going to work. Okay, so I probably want to use like a really dark gray or a black for the background on that. Okay, so this is a good site to bookmark when you're thinking of color schemes for your website. All right, so when we use color with CSS, we can apply that color to different elements, right? So let's take a look at this example here. We're configuring our H1 header, okay? And this is using Inline CSS. So this would be incorporated right there into the code of the body section. And what we would do, we add in right after that first opening H1 tag there, we're going to insert style equals, and in parentheses, we're going to put color, colon, give it the value, semicolon for our next value here. We want to set the background color, okay, to like a gray. All right, and then we close that with the parentheses and then our closing tag there. So we're just inserting that style into that opening H1 tag. All right, so what that does then, the browser reads it, comes across this H1 style and says, okay, I need to make the text color red and I need to make that background color gray for this H1. All right, so it makes that change right there, and then it'll output the text that we have for that heading as red text on a gray background. All right, so that's what we're using inline. So say we want to use an embedded style sheet here. Okay, so this is where we're putting our styling in the head section of our web page. Okay, that top part. For that, we're going to use two tags here, an opening style tag and a closing style tag. Okay, so on the right side over there, you can see in the blue box, we have our opening style. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start inserting those different elements, okay, with the variables. All right, so we have body. So we want to style the body of our web page, and we're telling it we want to use black background, and then we're going to use that white. So if you see all F's there, it's going to have a white foreground. Or I'm sorry, yeah, white text on a black background. Okay. So as far as the way that we're putting those different variables in, it's the same way whether we're using an internal embedded style sheet or an inline or an external sheet. The one thing you have to remember with embedded style sheets, we just have to include those opening and closing style tags. All right, so here's another example where we're going to style the body. All right, so we got our body with the opening curly brackets there and closing brackets. Okay, so with that one, we're doing kind of a grayish blue background with kind of a dark blue text. Okay, and then we're going to move down then to the H1. So for our H1 header, that would be that top one. We're doing like a dark blue background with a light blue text color. And then for the H2, that would be kind of in the middle there, an example on the left, where it says new media and web design. We're going to have kind of that medium hued blue with the dark blue text. Okay, so we can have as many of these different style rules set up for all these different elements within our HTML page. All right, get through those. All right, so let's talk about text. So like I said, we can control like our font weight, our font style, size, the font family, all with CSS. All right, so here's some examples of using font size properties. The column on the left, we're using the text values, where we would type either like large, small, medium, extra small. The next column there is M units. Okay, so most of the time, what you'll see used is we're either going to use pixel units or M units with our font sizing. Okay, the other ones we have available to us as well, we have point size and percentage. Sometimes we'll use percentage. Kind of just depends on what type of layout that we're working on as far as the website web pages. The font family property. Okay, so there's some different caveats for this though, because not everyone has the same fonts installed on their computers. Okay, so we have to be careful. We don't really want to choose too specific of a font or too obscure of a font, just because we don't know if that font is going to be installed. So there's a way that we code that. Okay, so down at the bottom there, so we're styling the font family for our paragraph element, right? So we do font family : and then we're going to tell the browser to, first option is to pull up Arial and apply that if the Arial font is installed on that computer. If the Arial font isn't installed, go ahead and use Verdana. Okay. If Verdana doesn't happen to be installed on the computer, then go ahead and just use whatever default sans serif font there is. Okay, so we have to kind of know whether we want to use a serif font, which would be like Times New Roman, Georgia, or like a sans serif font, which would be Arial or Verdana or Geneva, one of those. There's also monospace type fonts. The last two there, I'd probably stay away from, just because for one thing, I don't know, they're kind of ugly. But I'd say 90% of the time, you're either going to use some sort of a serif font or some sort of a sans serif font. All right, so let's look at another example here of an embedded style sheet, and it's styling for this page you see here on the left. So that example. So we got our body where we're using a background color, that light blue, with the dark blue text for the color value there. Then we have our font family. So for the main body, we're telling it to use Arial and Verdana sans serif font. Okay, so that's for like pretty much all the texts you see there. But now we're going to start to override some of that body text because for the H1, we want to use a different background color. We want to use a little bit of a different text color, line height, okay, because we want some spacing at the top and bottom of the header there. And we're also going to tell it to use a serif font for that header. So we're going to use Georgia, Times New Roman, or whatever serif font is installed on that computer. Okay, and then same thing for the H2. So those H2 sections, we want them to look a little bit different as well. And then we can also even be more specific then with our paragraph element. We want it to use a font size of 90M, and we also want to indent that text by a value of 3M. Right, and we can even style our unordered list. Okay, so remember last week we worked on lists. So we use that UL element, and we tell it we want to have the font bold on that list. So now you're starting to see how we can really apply some nice design elements to our web page to make it look, a lot more professional by using this CSS for, even just this simple example here. Okay, so I think we talked about those, like line height, text align, all of that. We can even do some text shadowing if we want to. All right. All right, so I'm going to pause there. Any questions on any of the stuff that we've talked about so far? Okay. Oh, let me look here, chat. All right, okay, good. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about with our CSS, with those different rules, we break those then down into, so the different part of our style sheet, we're using different, what we call selectors. Okay. Oh, I had a question here from Henry. Is it okay to yeah, Henry, if you need to restart your computer, that's fine. I'll just let you back in once you're booted up. So whatever you're not seeing, it'll be recorded so you can go back and look at it. Okay, so we have what we call different selectors for our CSS rules. The first one is an HTML element selector. The next one is a class selector. Then we have an ID selector and a descendant selector. All right, so let's talk about each of those. Oops. All right. Okay, so this is a class selector. With a class selector, what we're doing is we're applying a CSS rule to a certain class of elements on a web page. Okay. All right, so like, for example, if we have different groups of text within our page, and we want to apply a certain color or font style to those different parts of text in that web page, we can set up what we call a class selector, and then we style it, and then we can apply that to those different classes throughout the page. Okay, and so to do that, you see there on the right side, any class name that we create in our style sheet, we put a period before it. Okay, so for example, this one's called new, so we're creating a class called new, and so we do after our opening style tag, we do period new. All right, and then we have our curly brackets, then with our different values in there for our different properties. Okay, so we're doing a color and we're doing a font style of italic. Okay, so what that's going to create then, in our HTML part of the page, with that, for example, if we're doing a paragraph and we want that paragraph to use this class selector, in our opening P tag there, we just add in class equals new in parentheses. And then we have our text. And then so what it's going to do, it's going to load up that style that we created in the style sheet, and it's going to apply the red color and the italicized style. All right, another class selector, I'm sorry, another CSS selector that you'll use quite a bit is called an ID selector. Now, the main difference between that and the class selector is with the ID selector, you only apply a CSS rule to just one element on a web page. Okay. So with this one, instead of using a like dot new or period new, we're going to add a hashtag in front of there. Okay, so we use hashtag new, and then, for example, we want red color, bigger font size, and italicized. Okay, and then, for example, then if we apply that to that paragraph element in the HTML, it would apply that style. But the main thing you have to remember with the ID selector, you can only apply that to one element on a web page, whereas the class selector, we can apply it to multiple elements. And then the last one here, the descendant selector, that would be if we want to specify an element within the context of its container element or its parent element. Okay. So the example here that they have, what it does, it configures a green text color only for paragraph tags located within an element that's assigned to that certain ID name that we name content. Okay, so we set up an ID selector called content. All right, and then anytime there is a P tag in that content, it's going to apply a color. And this will be easier when we start doing some of our hands-on practice activities. We'll do this and it'll probably make more sense once you use it in practice. And then another one is a span element. So again, if you just wanted to format maybe a couple words within a sentence, you can use a span element to style those. All right, so here's an example of that. So we have a span element, say, so we set up this, this class selector called company name, where we have a bold font, pretty big size, 1.25 M. Okay, so to incorporate that within a sentence, so for example, if you just wanted to call out a few keywords within a sentence, you can see there in our HTML code, we start out with our opening paragraph element tag. Your needs are important to us at, then we want that Acme web design to be big and bold. Then we just insert what we call that span element. Okay, so we have the opening bracket there, span, space, class equals company name in parentheses. Okay, so then what the code is reading is that I need to go up, find that company name selector in our style sheet, and apply that style to just Acme web design, because then we have our closing span tag right after the word design. And then you'll see there and below that what that would look like in the browser. So external style sheets, talked about these. They always need to end with extension .css. And when we create those, we'll be able to create those in brackets, just like we do with our HTML files. It's just that it's a separate text file. Oops. All right. So like I said, with the nice thing with external style sheets, you can apply that same style to multiple HTML files, right? So if we had an index, clients, about.html, we can apply that same style to all those different pages. So the way we do that in the head section of our HTML file, what we're going to do is we're just going to link that, that style sheet. Okay, so we'll use this little snippet of code there, link rel equals style sheet. Okay, so we need to tell it what kind of link we're doing here. We're doing a style sheet file, okay, and then our href equals, and then that would just be the name of our CSS file. So this one's called color.css. All right. Okay, so this here is just another example. We would have a external style sheet where we have all of our styles set up. So body, we're using background, different background color and text color. And then all we need to do is associate that in our head section of the HTML file. And we will, you guys will get practice doing that in the hands-on activities when we start working on those tomorrow or Wednesday. Okay. So we did all that, style sheets. Yep. Okay, so just a couple more things here and then we'll be done. We can also use CSS to set up certain styles of layout, page layout. All right. So most of the time you're going to see your web pages that kind of use this centered format where everything is kind of centered within the browser window. Okay, so we can do that by using like for example, here we're using an ID selector called container, and we're setting our left margins and our right margins to auto. Okay, so what that does, it's telling the browser to make those left and right margins the same, no matter how we size the screen on our browser. And we're also telling it that container needs to be 80% of the width of whatever our browser window is. Okay, so then the browser is going to just automatically add in those margin spaces to the left and right to give us a nice, clean, centered layout there. Okay, last few other things here. So when we talk about cascade, the reason we use it is because as we kind of cascade down, so think of these as kind of steps. When we load a web page, the first thing that it's going to load is just your browser defaults for fonts and color, all that stuff. Then if we have say an external style sheet, that external style sheet is going to override whatever your browser defaults are. Okay, so that .css file is going to override the browser defaults for styling. Then maybe we have an embedded style in maybe just one of our HTML files on our site. That embedded style is going to override the external style sheets and the browser defaults for just that page. And then maybe within that page, we have some special inline styles and maybe just one section of that page. That inline style is going to override whatever embedded styles we have. Okay, so that's kind of how we get the cascading part. So you just have to remember that external styles override the browser defaults. Embedded styles will override our external style sheets. And then the inline styles will always override the embedded and external styles. Okay. And then, of course, just like we did the validation for our HTML last week, we can also validate our CSS. Okay, so by using that same validation service, the W3C site, we can have it look at our CSS and make sure everything's up to snuff. There will be a few times where, and we'll come across this in some of the activities that we do, where it's it's not 100% accurate all the time, but it's still a good practice to have it validate the CSS and look at it just to make sure you're not missing any kind of major step there when you're working on that. All right, so just summarize cascading style sheets, right? Those are those rules to style, font, color, format, layout. We can have inline styles, embedded styles, and external styles. And we talked about how each of those can override another one. We can use our different selectors within our style rules, class selector, ID selector, and descendant selectors, and then the validation part of it. All right, that is it. So I know we went over a lot of information there in a short amount of time. I'll upload those slides to Canvas for you to review. All this information is also in the book, so it'd probably be good to just read through the chapter again. And then what we'll do on Wednesday, I'll have you guys log in and we'll start going through coding the hands-on practice activity assignments just like we did last week. Okay, so we'll plan on doing that Wednesday and Friday, and we should be able to get through all of those activities this week before you start in on the case study assignment. All right, okay, again, if you have any questions on anything, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a text, and we'll plan on seeing everybody then on Wednesday and do some coding. All right, bye, have a good day.